Welcome to Links and Locks, the Action Network's golf betting podcast presented by Bet365. I'm your host, Roberto Arguello, and I'm excited to be joined alongside Spencer Aguiar and Nick Bretwish as we break down the first event of the 2024 PGA Tour season. It is the Sentry, no longer the Sentry Tournament of Champions, as every player who finished in the top 50 on the FedEx Cup playoffs last year is into this event. Additionally, every other winner on the PGA Tour outside of the top 50 is in this event. In all, 60 players qualified. 59 of them are here. Rory McIlroy, once again, skipping this event. And it should be a really fun event with a bunch of the top players in the world at a course with stunning views. Players can go super low. It has the fun, dramatic 18th hole par 5 that's reachable in 2 where anything can happen. And of course, because we're in Hawaii this week, we get night golf for the first time in 2024. I could not be more excited to be alongside Nick and Spencer. Gentlemen, welcome into the podcast. And Spencer, I'll start with you. What is your best bet for the Sentry this week?
I guess let's just start 2024 off on a note where I don't think all of us are going to agree, because I have seen Nick provide content for Action, and I know he is not in love with the player that I am backing here. But Sam Burns minus 125 over Cameron Young. You can find that over on Bet365.
All right. So if you listened to our podcast last year or watch us on YouTube, shout out YouTube, you would know that Spencer Aguiar was a huge proponent of Cameron Young. But 2024, new year, new Spencer, he's fading Cameron Young this week. I'm excited to hear why. Nick, I know you've just got outrights this week. What is your favorite outright bet on your card so far?
I will go with Jordan Spieth at 26-1 to win outright, boys. Night golf.
All right. Jordan Spieth, past winner here on the islands. We'll see if he can get back into the winner's circle. For me, my best bet this week is going to be on the Postman, JT Poston. He is plus 175 to finish in the top 20, so it's just the top third of this field. And once again, plus 175 with all ties paid in full. So be sure to shop around, as you don't want to be a victim of dead heat pricing. But before I get into why I'm riding with the Postman, Spencer, why do you like Bermuda Burns over Cameron Young, who's no longer your boy?
I mean, I think that's what happens when you lose Paul Tesori on the bag, who has been like historically more my boy over the years with all the years that he was with Webb. So the divorce made me pick sides there. I'm going to side with Paul Tesori at the end of the day. But, I think it's one of those things that I always talk about miscut equity being one of the main factors I weigh into my model. Unfortunately, we are going to lose that here when everyone is guaranteed 4 days of action. That's going to provide this massive alteration in this slate. It likely probably does decrease our projected win rates moving forward by quite a bit when we do get these limited field contests. We have a lot of wiggle room after going nearly 59% through 1,000 plays. So I don't think it's all doom and gloom, but there's a definite downside looming of having to survive random weekend chaos that does come into the mix. But I still think that if we are looking for downside, and that's something that I weighed into my model a little bit, you also need to look for the upside that comes into play on some of these players, just because there are going to have to be 4 rounds of golf being played. So when we look at this particular matchup, and I'm looking for the downside to mix with the upside here, it got me into the spot where there was one opponent that was the second most significant fade option I had that was mixed with one of my highest climbers that I had in projected upside for the good that he did bring to the table here. So for Burns, when I look at him, I know the course history is going to leave a lot to be desired with the finishes that he's provided, but 7 of his 8 rounds at this tournament have shot under par. I know the long distance proximity is going to also leave a lot to be desired. I'm sure that's the one thing that Nick would talk about that raised the alarm for him when he was building his numbers. But my model believed his Kapalua results are just being too negatively skewed for those reasons that I've talked about. 67 and 69 over the weekend last year. You get this heightened optimism for a golfer who ranked first in my model when combining projected total driving and weighted putting for Kapalua. Thought when you combine that with his end of season trending form that he did have after a rather slow middle of the season for him, and then the weighted scoring potential that he possessed for this track, it just felt like this was the year where he was going to provide the best finish that he did have at this course. that isn't enough to jump into the mix if my model also doesn't have the concerns around Young. So when he had his declining form from within 100 yards and outside of 200 yards, you mix that with a putter that finished outside of the top 40 in my model on this particular green complex. I just thought it generated an answer of two golfers that are going in complete opposite directions from a statistical perspective. Only a 2% edge for me. I normally don't give plays that are that small in the head-to-head market on this show, but Roberto, you and I were talking about this before we went on air, and I guess obviously Nick is going to give a very similar answer because I didn't know where he was at before now. If he only has an outright card, I don't think he's found much value either. Just one of those tournaments to start the year with this limited field where there's just not a ton to talk about, unfortunately.
I've got a couple intriguing plays in the outright market and a few others that I'd like to workshop with you guys, but we'll get to that a little bit later in the show after we get through all of our best bets and our course preview. But Nick, why are you intrigued by Jordan Spieth at 26-1 this week?
Yeah, you mentioned it earlier too, the previous success here. Like, we've been like in the community, DFS players, gamblers, everybody like that has been talking about Jordan Spieth kind of finding his just lights out ball striking that we were used to seeing back in that, 2015, 2016, 17, I guess even 18 range. And that's what my numbers are starting to think that he's coming back to. The long iron play is absolutely elite. We know he's one of the best short game players in the world, which is what I value here a lot, is those long irons and, within 100 yards. Obviously, his putter started to come back into form too, which matters to me a lot here on these bigger greens. And when you really take like his weakness, it's hitting fairways, it's accuracy with the driver. He kind of still sprays it a little bit. He's gaining his distance back that he's had years ago. It's like if you take away his only weakness, and that's hitting fairways, I think this course fits him fantastic. Obviously, he's very comfortable here. He's had a ton of success. He was second, I think, in his debut here right after he won the John Deere. He finished first the next time he was out there back in 2016, third in 2017. I think he had a really bad Sunday when he finished ninth in 2018. Obviously, he went on a hiatus there from winning on the PGA Tour for a little bit, but the form is starting to come back into play, and he's still navigated these courses very well his last two times out, and now the ball striking is back where we want to be. I wouldn't price him any longer than 20-1, so when I see 25, 26-1 out there, I'm going to take it.
I want to touch on this topic really quickly before we move past this, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, Nick. So I'm not necessarily a comp course sort of guy. Like, I'd like to build things out in a particular fashion that is going to be the event that we're playing. But one of the things that I just kept finding over and over again, which would be a really strong corollary trend for Spieth here, this almost looked like the easy version, like different green complexes. One is going to be bent grass, one's going to be Bermuda, one is going to be extremely fast. You have a slow surface here. This felt like some sort of Augusta National comp for me in my model. So I'm curious if you saw the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. When you kind of just look at similar course fits for me, I mean, that's kind of why we play players that aren't very accurate and hit it a little bit longer at Augusta, but have an elite short game. So yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. It's a much lower scoring version of Augusta National. I like that a lot.
I do too. I think at Augusta, you place more of an emphasis on short game, although I do think short game is important this week, just as Colin Morikawa from Sunday last year when Nick and I both had the outright ticket on it.
Don't bring it. I even prematurely checkmarked it on Twitter with like 5 holes left. All hell breaks loose. Oh, you had to start the year that way, huh, Roberto?
So short game is important here. We know that. I would also say bogey avoidance more important at Augusta and a little bit less of a weight on par 5 scoring because there are 4 par 5s at Augusta instead of 5 here. But obviously those are hugely scoreable holes at Augusta National, whereas a lot of the other par 4s, par 3s are really tough. Whereas here at Kapalua, they're not as challenging and you'll have some other birdies built into the scorecard on drivable holes. But nonetheless, Nick, I like the point you made about, and Spencer, you as well, about playing these golfers who take out driving accuracy and let them thrive and do what they do best. And I think that is reflected in my outright betting card, which we'll get to in just a few short moments. But getting back to my best bet for the weekend, it's going to be JT Poston plus 175 to finish in the top 20 with ties paid in full. If you listen to us over the fall, over the FedEx Cup fall, you might have heard us talk about JT Poston a lot because he's a guy who didn't necessarily need to play in the fall. He was in the top 50 of the FedEx Cup standings, so he got into signature events like this already. But he's playing the best golf of his career, even though he's not super long off the tee, below average below the tour average in driving distance and driving accuracy, but he is playing his best golf on approach ever. And with the putter, he might be the best putter in the world right now. I think I would have Denny McCarthy, Cameron Smith, and JT Poston in my top tier of putters in the world. But right now, Cameron Smith, not in this field, another golfer who's had success at Augusta National and here, just like John Rahm, winner of both of those events last year. But JT Poston, on a course where, yes, it's 7,600 yards, so you might think, well, why wouldn't you want a longer golfer than just JT Poston? It's because a lot of these holes at Kapalua have hugely sloping fairways where balls end up in collection areas. And so it doesn't matter how far you hit it off the tee, you're going to have a similar shot coming in as everybody else. And we saw that last year with Colin Morikawa, who hits all the fairways normally, even though these are huge fairways, he still found the fairway. But you get into a wedge contest with Colin Morikawa, and he's going to have a leg up on you more often than not. JT Poston, not as good of an approach player as Colin Morikawa. No one else really is. But he's a much better putter. And at plus 175 for a top 20, I think he's a good candidate to back because not only does he have these elite characteristics on approach and putting, he's been super consistent. He's playing the best golf of his life, as I said earlier. He's gained at least a stroke per round on approach in 4 of the last 6 tournaments and has gained overall on approach in 8 straight. Looking at Spencer's model, he's 4th in this field in strokes gained approach over the last 24. Take the last 24 with what you will, because some guys haven't really played since the Tour Championship. He's also 1st in this field in the last 24 rounds in strokes gained putting. And he was 3rd in the field here in 2020 in strokes gained putting. I believe that was the only other time he played at this event. And as a result, he's shown that he can make putts here. He played here twice. He played here last year as well, finished T21. Also gained strokes putting then as well. He can gain strokes putting on the moon. It doesn't matter where he is. I like JT Poston because of this consistent and strong and improving approach play. And who knows if we've even found his ceiling yet. So I'm going to be backing him in some other markets as well, as I think he's undervalued throughout the board. But before we get into any other bets, Spencer, let's jump into the course breakdown for the Plantation course at Kapalua here in Lahaina, Hawaii.
I always find Kapalua to be extremely interesting from a scoring versus statistical perspective. Like, there's really no way you can look at past iterations of these contests and not immediately notice what has transpired here in recent years. 69 of 76 players over the last 2 years have finished 10 under par or better. I think that's important to note since birdie shootouts often have the stigma of this, I guess I would call convoluting the handicapping process because they keep more players in the mix, or at least that's something that has been widely regarded out there and something that, if I'm being honest, that I kind of thought myself with it. The more back testing I have done on that, though, I'm not so sure that's necessarily the case. Like, yes, you do get these random 200-1 sort of golfers who take down some of these, birdie shootouts to get to, let's just say, 25 under par or better. But there are some, I guess I would credit it more to the lackluster quality of the field more than anything else, like plus the poor initial pricing that comes into play with it on that golfer who did win at 201. Like, it's one thing when a 200-1 golfer beats a field of only a few stars. Like, we've seen that before at the American Express. There's more room for, or I guess less room for error to be had because of the minuscule difference when everybody is scoring on the same holes. It's another when you take into an account event like the Sentry, and then you deviate away from the connotation of this being a tournament that only allows winners from the previous year. Not that many extra people got added to the mix. I'm sure we would have, if you're the commissioner, Jay Monahan, I'm sure you'd love to have Justin Thomas, Min Woo Lee here, but it still propels the point that I'm trying to make, that you have a very top-notch field here that is going to create this significant change that does add the win equity to the top and kind of diminish things at the bottom. So I think from a property standpoint, Kapalua was designed in 1991 by Ben Crenshaw and Bill Corr. You have these slow Bermuda green complexes and open fairways that are pronounced from the second that you're going to step onto the grounds. We see a 12% increase in driving accuracy. Roberto, you've talked about that already. You get this 8-yard uptick for distance. A lot of the slope in the collection areas there. You also have elevation changes off the tee. Those two factors will help increase the GIR rate from 65 to 79%. I think when you hear answers like that of easy to hit fairways, massive green and regulation rates, that surge for distance, and the general ease for scoring, It's really easy to call this a straightforward test that has no bite, but it kind of goes back to the point that we were trying to make of this being the easy version of Augusta National at the end of the day. I think there's a reason why 11 times a non-American has won this event since 2002. And it's a venue that really does accentuate particular factors that are going to correlate well with scrambling. When you dive into the increase that players receive with their irons from both under 100 yards and over 200 yards, I think the general enhancement from under 100 is the exponentially larger thing that I'm looking at, just because that's the bigger difference that you're getting from the baseline marks on tour yearly. So for me, that meant if you could produce birdie looks when you did get a short iron in hand, or the ability to salvage a score in some of those spots, just because, I mean, if you're missing greens in regulation, you're already behind the 8 ball, so you better find a way to get yourself out of it when you do create problems there. That's kind of the answers of what I'm looking for to walk out of Hawaii with the first title in the year, because there is this massive spike in expectation in areas that you don't normally translate into being a birdie contest with some of those short game metrics.
I think that makes a ton of sense, Spencer. And going back to the Augusta National comparison, a lot of similarities there. And just, I would think you move the most common approaches from longer mid irons to the short ones and the long ones, given the increased number of par fives. And also, one thing to keep in mind is the wind here at Kapalua. It hasn't been very windy the last couple of years, which is why you've seen record scores on the PGA Tour. Last year, John Rahm went at 27 under. Cam Smith won at 34 under par 2 years ago and set the PGA Tour scoring record and broke the record that was set 15 minutes before him by 2 other golfers. So you're going to need to go low here, especially if the winds aren't blowing. If they are blowing, it makes it a different test. And so be sure to keep that in mind. The forecast says you could see 20-mile-an-hour winds throughout the week. So who knows what's actually going to happen? It's in the middle of the Pacific, so you would think there's going to be some variance there potentially. But keep an eye on it. And if you have players you like to back in the wind or fade in the wind, even more importantly, be sure to keep an eye out for their odds on the board wherever you have a chance to find them. But with that being said, it's a good time to give a reminder that the Links and Locks podcast is proudly presented by Bet365. Bet365 doesn't do ordinary. They believe that every sport should be epic. Every touchdown, every game, every point, and every play. From the moments that are legendary to the ones that fly under the radar. See for yourself when you sign up today with code ACTION and get $365 in bonus bets when you bet just $1. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Must be 21 or older only. Must be present in Colorado, Kentucky, Iowa, New Jersey, Ohio, or Virginia. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem and wants help, call 1-800-GAMBLER in Colorado, Kentucky, New Jersey, Ohio, and Virginia, or 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. Terms and conditions apply. Nick, I didn't give you a chance to touch on the course preview. Anything you'd like to add, or are you ready to jump into the outright card?
No, I'm ready to jump into it. I do want to comment though real quick. As much as I did mention like fading Sam Burns, it's more in the betting and the DFS market. I do like him significantly more than Cameron Young, so I am going to tail Spencer on that one. Did have a question for you guys for the Impod potential play. I said I wouldn't do it this year just because, I did post my ROI on a per golfer basis. It was not good for this guy, and for some reason I'm already getting sucked back into him. But what about Tony Finau? And we'd have to lay 130 over Cameron Young.
I guess I'll take it first. I'm probably lower than you are on Nick on Finau this week. With that being said, when I'm looking at my model and I'm looking at the value differences that I have across the board, like there are really very few golfers that you would say are, let's just say, sub 50-1 in this field that are anywhere near how low my model is on Cameron Young this week. Like it would be Cameron Young, it would be Brian Harmon, it would be Keegan Bradley. Like that's the mix of how much lower I am on those guys than even if I am a little bit lower on Tony Finau. I think at some point we're probably paying a lot of juice, and I think I could even make the same argument with my Sam Burns play with it. I think that we're talking about very small margin differences, but I'm kind of under the mentality, and I give this answer every single week that I do a show, I'm more inclined no matter what the answer is, even if I am shooting for upside on a particular golfer, I'm always looking for a person that I want to fade. And for me, Cameron Young is that golfer that I am trying to take on in different portions of the market. So I don't have any takes of why not to make the play. I just think that we're very close on value differences here.
Okay. Yeah, it did grade out as value for me. And then I look at just Tony Finau, course familiarity, if you will. He's been solid there, and Cameron Young's a debutant in relatively bad form, I guess. Like Roberto said earlier, though, these guys haven't played in a while, so take that with a grain of salt. But I would have it priced right around minus 135, minus 140. So if I'm itching to get out of just the outright market, I think that's where I was going to lean.
And that's essentially where I'm at with Sam Burns. Like there's a 125 price. I have him at about 135. Like we're talking about very small differences in the market.
Nick, so you mentioned you have Jordan Spieth 26-1 on your outright card. Who else is in your action so far this week?
First guy, I like him a ton too, and my numbers seem to like him a ton. Matthew Fitzpatrick, 30-1. And then I did go down the board a little bit. Eric Cole, 70-1. I don't think that's a guy that I've ever backed in any market ever. DFS, top 40 placements, matchups. I'm not an Eric Cole guy, but like he graded out very similar for a guy that I like a ton this week, JT Poston. So I'm glad you talked about him. I figured you'll maybe get there in the outright market, so I'll let you continue on Poston. And then Cameron Davis, 70-1. He is probably my favorite value golfer on the board this week. I think it's a big year for Cam Davis. I think I think he's probably like my second round pick in fantasy golf this year, Spencer. So let him stay on the board for me. I'm going after Cameron Davis this year.
If you look historically at this venue also, and I don't have the numbers up in front of me right now, but I want to say that there's been, and granted, there's a lot of overlap of who the winners have been, but I want to say there's been 7 winners from Australia of this event since 2004, give or take. So, I mean, that bodes well for a guy like Cameron Davis, who was possessing some of the best form we had seen to end the 2023 calendar season.
Yeah, and his short game's on the rise, and I think he 10th, 9th or 10th here last year, Roberto. Do you have last year's placements?
He was 10th last year in his only appearance, and there are 6 Australian winners at the Tournament of Champions, now the Sentry, since 2004.
It's a lock. All right, there you go.
Let me take this one step further, gentlemen. So I also have Cam Davis on my card. This is all music to my ears.
Good.
So in this tournament, I have an overarching theme, betting on guys who I think maybe we haven't seen their ultimate upside. So the lack of form doesn't necessarily scare me because I'm not betting any matchups or the regular placement market bets, just getting upside mostly on these guys. And so Cam Davis, a guy whose statistical profile for last year might be skewed a little bit if you look at the overall PGA Tour stats, because he was getting over that illness that resulted in him missing his first 4 cuts of the season last year. I'd also say, missing his first 5 cuts of the calendar year last year, and 6 out of 7 at one point. And he's a guy who has everything in his bag. He is long off the tee, not super accurate driving the ball, but he's a strong putter, above average, very good around the green, and very solid on approach as well. He's a player who at 28 years old is in the middle of his prime. And if you look at how he fared in some of the big boy tournaments last year, the PGA Championship, he gained nearly 3.5 strokes per round, finished T4, and he lost strokes on the greens that week. If he just gained strokes putting, there's a chance that he could have been right in that conversation with Brooks Koepka and Scotty Scheffler, Victor Hovland. He was 3 under par, 4 shots behind second place at Hovland and Scheffler, but he's a guy who we mentioned in the fall has a lot of upside. I've bet him at 200-1 to win the Masters. You can get that out there, pretty widely available. And at 200-1, I think this guy's just got too much talent in that type of a market. Kind of similar to what we saw with Wyndham Clark last year, where he's a guy who is potentially making that next leap and playing more consistent golf rather than being a little bit more sporadic. So I'm a big fan of Cam Davis, and I'll keep rolling with it since I got into my card. I also have JT Poston outright for all the reasons I laid out in my best bet. Got him at 90-1. So love the potential upside with him there. We've seen shorter hitters contend here, so I like his chances. I also went with Sahith Theegala, a guy who can be wayward off the tee, but we know that shouldn't be too big of an issue. Although if somebody can find a way to miss these fairways consistently, if he's not playing great, it could be Sahith Theegala, but that's why we're just betting him for upside. And then I also bet Wyndham Clark, 60-1. He's just too good to be a 60-1 golfer in this field. I think overall talent, he's a guy who's gotten it together. There's no weakness in his game. The one potential weakness is driving accuracy, but once again, that is mitigated here. And overall, I wanted guys who putt well because you're going to need to get into that 20, 25 under par range. And all of these golfers I bet on are at least above average putters, if not significantly above average putters. So those are my outright bets. I have a couple of guys whom I'm considering backing. Most notably, Jason Day, 55-1, is probably the first guy off of my card. No. So we'll get your thoughts on this. Russell Henley, 45-1, also in consideration. Always. So we've got Day and Henley propaganda checked off of your bingo card for our podcast, first one of the year.
It didn't take very long to try to immediately get us to jump into a wager that neither one of us has, that now all of a sudden we're going to want to put onto the card.
I also was very intrigued by Eric Cole, 75-1, and Corey Connors, 75-1. Corey Connors would break with my little theme of backing guys who are above average putters, but everything else is very intriguing. I know he's not great around the greens either. And then two other guys who kind of just shocked me with where their odds were today or this week. Harris English and Lucas Glover, both 110-1. They feel like guys who should be better fits here. Lucas Glover, we have to have our Lab Golf putter propaganda also in here as well. We know had that resurgence on the greens last year. Spencer, I believe he's number 1 in weighted proximity on your sheet this week.
Yes.
So that also made me even more intrigued in Lucas Glover, even though he's a shorter hitter off the tee. And Harris English, we mentioned Cam Smith, John Rahm, 2 past winners of this event, not in the field. The player who most recently won this event is Harris English, and he's at 110-1. I'm intrigued by those. I might end up sprinkling each of those guys to win 6 units instead of the normal 8. But any thoughts on any of those players? And if you had to pick one, maybe who would you add to your card, unless they're already on your card?
Can I just add in to Wyndham Clark real quick? So
yes,
I know your answer. So Spencer, real quick, in Illinois, there is a shop that is laying 75-1 for Wyndham Clark, and that caught my eye. I tweeted about that earlier. Sure, maybe he ended the season in poor form, but like Roberto said, everything about his game is great for this venue, especially, the downside in him is driver accuracy. Other than that, he absolutely pounds the ball. The approach game, we talked about him a lot on this show in the spring swing of things last year, just how he was trending. And I think you actually had a couple outrights at Wyndham Clark. Obviously, you had the U.S. Open there, and I think I was on it at Quill Hollow. But the market in general seems to absolutely hate him, and that scared me a little bit. He is a sizable underdog across offshore, the domestic market, to Cameron Young, and that's what scared me. And then the book that I was looking at had 75-1, and then I see everybody else is right around that 55 to 65 range. So I don't know. Am I reading too much into it? Because I do have room. I only have 0.83 units at risk. I wanted just to finish this tournament pre-market with just 1 at risk, and I'm only going to take outrights just because the whole percentages on the finishing positions are crazy, and I do not like the no-cut events. Obviously, my success in the top 40 market and top 20 market in no-cut events were not very good last year, so I'm going to kind of let that mature a little bit. But thoughts on Wyndham Clark just overall?
I thought for the most part, the names that Roberto rattled off, I'm not on Lucas Glover this week. I'm not on Harris English. I think every other name that he mentioned, though, were options that I strongly considered in the outright market. I think if you look specifically at Clark and Day, who probably fit this answer more so than anybody else, you have these really high upside marks that are being found within my sheet that are mixing in with these really low floor numbers. So I think if you're talking about matchups, and I'm out on Cameron Young. I don't want to use him as the example here, but I can understand why Wyndham Clark is an underdog in a handful of these matchups, because I do think he has a lower floor that if the wheels unravel a little bit, that things could fall apart. But I think the upside is to be found. At a certain point, you reach value on these numbers. And I tend to agree with both of you on the sentiment on Clark. And it's the same exact answer I would give with Jason Day. There's the possibility that he implodes, and I understand that. And mean, he has a new clothing sponsor now where he doesn't even look like Jason Day. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, not
what
a
he looks
fan of that either. No shame on the company, but he just looked good in Nike. I don't know what he was doing. Had a good year last year. He should have gave him one more year. But that's just my corporate hat on. Sorry there. Go ahead.
I mean, that was probably as wild as is. I mean, you can't really put this into a model, I guess, but that was one of the reasons why I got off of Jason Day. Like, I can't imagine him winning in whatever his new brand is out there. So I eventually got off of him. But no, like, all jokes aside with it, though, I think Clark and Day and players like that are what you want to be shooting for upside wise, because we are looking at a board, and this is something that we're going to have to be very cognizant of moving forward this year. These limited field tournaments, while the hold percentage is going to be the same, you're going to have to put down a little bit more exposure to get it, or to get some of your stuff towards the top of the board. So, like, I'll work into my betting card here as I give this answer, but I did decide to take a super aggressive approach and bet Scotty Scheffler. I moved my win amount down to 5 units instead of 8. That's one of those things that, like, I'm aware of. I'm getting super aggressive here compared to what I normally do. I never bet favorites in these fields, but it was one of those answers to where, like, Scheffler became a value in my sheet because I had him closer to 4.5 to 1 as a true value. And then you had these little pockets, and there weren't very many of them, but like Tommy Fleetwood, Matthew Fitzpatrick, Jason Day, Wyndham Clark, Tyrrell Hatton, those 5 probably more so than anybody else, where there was value to be found on the prices, because I do think you got a general overcorrection for one reason or another. For Fleetwood, it's the lack of win equity. For Day, it's maybe for Day and Clark, that would be, there's that mix and match of performances where things haven't looked that great lately. But I do generally think, based off of that answer, that the win equity is going to move to the top. So I bet Scheffler, and I don't have room on my card for that reason. I got him at 6.5 to 1 very early in the week at Bet365 in the enhanced market. I did take Tommy Fleetwood at 35 to 1. That's going to probably be the most aggressive card you're going to see me build the whole year. But I just cannot help but think that this is the tournament that Scotty Scheffler finally puts the putter together. We have been, and this isn't even like an exaggeration when I give this answer, I think for the last 15 months, if at any point he would have gained strokes putting, he probably wins almost every single tournament that he's teed it up for. 33 spot improvement inside of my model on these slow Bermuda greens versus his baseline. If we are looking for that potential of him spiking, you add all the number 1 ranks that he has in my model. Not going to read through all of them. There's 10 categories, 5 of which is what I actually weighed where he graded number 1. But my hope is he's working with Phil Kenyon. He's a putting guru. He has helped players in the past, such as Brooks Koepka, really figure out that portion of their game. You know, we always talk about it, and this is kind of the unknown quantifier here, where, like, you can't really attach a weight to it, but players have not been in action. Some people overweigh what that means. Some people underweigh what that means. I think particularly for Scheffler, it's a positive that he finally got a break. He got a chance to work on this putting stroke of his for the last couple months. And I am hoping that he unleashes that on the tour this week, because if he does, and the winds remain a little bit calmer, I don't know what number he could theoretically get to. He probably breaks the course record if he can put it together. So I'm going to be very aggressive with Scheffler, and I know that's a stance that most people don't want to go to, with this being the first event of the year with a golfer that's sub 10 to 1. Nick and I talk about this all the time. We very rarely get into these spots, but I think with the lack of win equity that I had in most of these spots, or at least of an advantage that I would have in these situations, I decided to go to the very top and grab the golfer who did lap the field for me in most of the ways I ran my model.
One thing to note with Scheffler, even though it's a very small sample size, he's played in this event twice so far. He's gained strokes putting both times, also gained strokes around the green and on approach and off the tee as well. And just looking at his data golf page from last year, green everywhere around the green, on approach and off the tee. The question is solely on his putter. Last time he played a golf tournament, he gained strokes putting, snapping a 5 tournament streak of losing strokes putting. And guess what? He won that tournament by 3 shots. That was the Hero World Challenge in the first week of December. So he's looking for his 2nd consecutive win. I know that's not an official PGA Tour event, the Hero World Challenge, but got to give him some confidence. I believe he used a new putter in that event for the first time. So if he brings that putter back, it's never lost. And we'll see just what a little bit of confidence could potentially do for Scotty Scheffler's game. And we know no John Rahm this year. So not a ton of players beat him last year. T7 here, one of those guys is gone. And so a big opportunity for Scotty Scheffler and maybe a chance to capitalize on him in the first market without another big alpha in John Rahm and another one in Rory McIlroy, who's also not in the field this week.
I do think that there's a potential as we move forward, and I think you added a really good note there with now Rahm being to live and Rory not into this event. If a player can start hot here, which I guess specifically would be Scheffler in this specific example, I think legitimately we could be looking at him 3.5, 4-1 in some of these limited field contests moving forward. And like he will get priced out at a certain point if that's the case. But I thought he was a little bit overinflated with the price tag that he had. And yes, he hasn't lost with the putter yet. And now he's rocking his own John Rahm form of a beard, it looks like. So I don't know. Bearded Scotty Scheffler might just be a menacing force that is just going to take the PGA Tour by storm.
One of the few people who grows out a beard and looks younger than he did otherwise. Fellas, any other plays on your cards this week before we get into our rapid fire?
I have one. I am very tempted to do an in-pod play of either JT Poston for a top 20 or Cameron Davis for a top 20. I thought those were the two spots for me even before we came on air and talked about this, where I had value in my model for both of those two wagers. Probably if I was to directly choose between those two spots, I do like the value on Poston a little bit better. If you search around in the market, he has floated out into the plus 200 range for a top 20 at some particular books out there. So that's something to keep in mind if you are price shopping. The only other play that I will give for the time being, though, I did bet Eric Cole at plus 450 for a top 10. I think it's an extremely rare answer that a 35-year-old rookie could not only produce results out of nowhere, but end up doing so in a fashion that saw him fail to crack the top 100 for distance and accuracy on the season. It's one of those things that if you aren't long and you aren't accurate, it's going to be hard to score on some of these lengthy tests. But I think that's a testament to how elite he's been throughout the rest of his bag. We've seen what he's done before this hiatus, 4 top 4 finishes during his past 5 starts. There's that answer that books clearly seem to think that some sort of a regression is going to take place. I just don't necessarily think it's going to happen at the course where there's wide open fairways, to where all of a sudden this disadvantage that he had off the tee gets a little bit mitigated in spots. And I think the elite skill set that he has with the around the green, the approach numbers, all of that jumps back into the mix. So I don't know if I necessarily believe Cole is going to win this event, but I considered him for a top 20. I thought I kind of would rather go up to the top 10 range, just because I think these placement markets, like this is what Nick and I have been talking about for feels like 6 months now. They are juiced to the max. Like there is really no value to be found. And it makes matters worse that now all of a sudden you lose that top 40 placement market. You lose in a lot of these events, those 156 man fields, to where you still had a juice market. But when you're looking at individual player props on it, you might have had 1 or 2 players that you had like that exponential difference for that made it worth putting a wager on. You don't necessarily have that in a 59-man field no-cut event where everything is so juiced. So it's going to be a very slow start, I feel like, until maybe some of these things get either corrected or a book makes a mistake, because I'm not looking to jump into these placement markets for the most part myself.
Eric Cole, over his last 3 events, the RSM Classic, the Zozo Championship, and the Shriners Children's Open, T3, T2, T3, only 5 total players beat him in those 3 events. If there was no Christmas break, no New Year's break, there would be nobody hotter than Eric Cole right now, maybe other than Ludwig Aubert, who stole his Rookie of the Year campaign with the win at the RSM. But Eric Cole playing incredibly solid golf, really consistent, and I'm very much looking forward to him winning on the PGA Tour. I think it's going to happen, and to do it against the big boys would be really fun. Nick, I had a question for you. For Cam Davis, I'm seeing him with ties paid in full, plus 150 for top 20, plus 400 for top 10. Either of those that you prefer over the other?
I would take the top 20 just because I'm more conservative when it comes to placement markets. But yeah, with the ties paid in full, I'll give me the top 20 all day.
All right. I think I'm going to add an in-pod play on Cam Davis, also playing pretty consistently. Had one little falter in his most recent start in Australia, but other than that, had a really strong fall. And like we said, We're bullish on Cam Davis. Don't know how long we're going to see these numbers next to his name as they are this week. So I'm excited to hop on him before the market adjusts. Fellas, you ready to do some rapid fire?
Let's do it.
Roll.
All right. So looking at the odds board, I'll try to get to guys that we haven't talked about so far today. We mentioned Scheffler. We haven't talked about Victor Hovland at all. Would you rather have a ticket on Victor Hovland at 8.5 to 1, or let's say I gave it to you at 10 to 1? Would you rather have a ticket on Victor Hovland at 10 to 1, or 2 tickets on Sungjae Im at 35 to 1 and Brian Harman at 35 to 1? I'll start you off first, Spencer.
I don't want a ticket on Brian Harman. I would rather have a ticket on Sungjae Im and leave it there and just take the one wager than Victor Hovland at 8 to 1. I have some concerns about Hovland. I know he closed 2023 as the hottest. I mean, if like we want to say Aubert, Cole, him, like those were the 3 hottest players in the world. And Hovland catapulted himself by winning the FedEx Cup championship, you know, all the money that came with it. So I understand this answer I'm going to give here, but I do worry about the short game a little bit. He has improved at this venue every single time, going from 31st, 30th, and 18th. But I kind of think you're looking at a spot that the next jump in on the leaderboard for him probably puts him more in that like top 10, top 15 range. I just think at the end of the day, while there's been an improvement, and I certainly understand that with the short game, I still don't know if it's necessarily where it needs to be to win at a tournament like this. And if for whatever reason the wind does come into play and he starts missing some of these greens, and you know, it's like I know last year if you look at Morikawa, and I think we've been banned, or I'm going to get banned from the show if I talk about that ever again. But Morikawa lost that event because of the short game woes that he put together, and I just worry that with how much that my model weighed that at the end of the day, that Hovland ends up faltering, even if he does work himself into the top 10 of the leaderboard, that there's going to be some shot that he hits that everything goes south and maybe he doesn't get up and down from a spot where he should have, if we're talking purely like win equity here.
Nick, how about you?
I was going to say, can I just take the Sungjae ticket and pocket the rest?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not into Harman, but we know my thoughts on Brian Harman. But yes, I like Sungjae at that number a hell of a lot more than I like Victor Hovland at 10 to 1.
What has happened to me so far this year? I'm out on Brian Harman. I'm out on Cameron Young. Still in on Jason Day, but out on all these other players.
I respect this. This is a good year, Spencer. I feel it coming.
I did add that Jason Day 55 to 1, by the way. Moving on, we just mentioned Ludwig Aubert. He and Max Homa are both 15 to 1. These are 2 guys that I was very intrigued by this week, and 2 players whom I considered adding to my outright card. Didn't love the numbers, although I do kind of like Aubert's, honestly. Which one of these 2 would you rather have a ticket on at 15 to 1? Start with you, Nick.
Can I pass?
Sure.
Spencer, go ahead.
What is the reason for the pass? Because you like both or you don't like both?
I have a hard time reading both, and I just think the market is gone a little out of control on Ludwig. But there's nothing like, you look at every metric he has, he's absolutely lighting it up. I guess if I had to choose, give me Ludwig. I'll bite.
I'll take Max Homa. My bold prediction this year, I mean, I don't know how bold it actually is. I'll say Max Homa wins a major championship this season. So I think I wouldn't be shocked if he gets off to a quick start here and potentially takes down this event even.
PGA Tour Radio was talking him up too, that his game is in some of those guys that do the shows, like play locally out there with him in California, said he's just been lights out. So all right, switch my answer. Give me Homa. Thanks, Spencer.
You mentioned Homa's form. Won in his last official start at the Nedbank Golf Challenge on the DP World Tour. And you have to go back all the way to the Travelers Championship when he missed the cut back in June, when he finished outside the top 20 of any event outside the top 21 of any event on the PGA Tour. He has, I believe, 6 straight top 12 finishes, and his 7th place finish at the Fortinet was his only PGA Tour event in the fall. That was his worst finish in that tournament in the last 3 years because he won the previous 2 Fortinet championships, especially the one in 22, in dramatic fashion. Moving on down the board, Patrick Cantlay and Xander Schauffele are 15 and 17 to 1. If I had to make you take a ticket on one of those two, Spencer, which one would you rather have?
I like Cantlay this week. I mean, I think this is another thing where I'm going back to a player that I do like. I've been all over the board. Some players are in, some players are out. But Cantlay for me was, if we're outside of Scotty Scheffler here, was really the only other true value that I had on the board at that 16 to 1 price. If we're looking at a golfer that's, let's say, sub, I mean, I guess Hatton would have been the next name that was value. So anybody that's like between above Hatton, like the only two values I had were Scheffler and Cantlay. So I think Cantlay's interesting. I couldn't get there, but I certainly understand why somebody did bite at that 16 to 1 price.
Nick, what do you think?
Xander, come on, that's my guy. Coming off like the best year he's ever had putting too. Give me Xander. He's lit this place up. I know he hasn't. I don't think he did win back in 2019, right before COVID. But with Drew last year with the injury, I'm going back to Xander. This place just fits his eye. There's magic with him here, and I love Xander Schauffele. So any chance I can answer his name, I will go Xander.
I'd lean Xander there too. You mentioned 2019 winner here, 2020 T2, 2021 T5. So tons of great memories at Kapalua for Xander Schauffele. All right, moving on down the board, we talked about most other guys through 30 to 1. Ricky Fowler's 38 to 1. Russell Henley is 45 to 1. Nick, which one of those two would you rather have a ticket on?
Russ. My numbers surprisingly did not like Ricky at all. So I'll give you a short answer here, move on. And again, it's a homer pick for me, but I'm going Russ.
Spencer?
I'll take Ricky. I think that what he's put together at this course over the years is noteworthy for a golfer who did see a resurgent effort last season on tour. I wouldn't be surprised if he's able to continue that trend that he was putting together last year. I don't know if he necessarily wins, but he was a top 15 sort of win equity play for me, where Russell Henley, as much as I like him and as high as I am on him for this season, and I think there are going to be moments where the numbers are going to spike and you're going to see that within my model, wasn't necessarily here at a venue that resembled Kapalua.
Very different venue next week at the Sony Open, one where Russell Henley has had a lot of success. Perhaps that could be a spot where you want to target him coming up very soon. All right, fellas, last one. We'll get you out of here on this one. Sepp Straka is 50 to 1. Keegan Bradley's 55 to 1. Hideki Matsuyama 60 to 1. And Justin Rose is 60 to 1 as well. So that's Straka 50, Bradley 55, Matsuyama 50, and Matsuyama 60 and Rose 60. Among those four, Spencer, which one would you most like to have a ticket on?
During the offseason, I was holding this favorite golfer draft on Twitter. Everybody was voting on it. Funny enough, Justin Rose got in on the action and was trying to get people to vote for him on it, and he got by a couple rounds because of it. I feel like I should pay back the favor from all the exposure that he gave me by retweeting the post there. He'd probably be my second choice. I guess I'm not a good new friend to him. I'm going to say Hideki Matsuyama, solely for the reason that if somebody in this range is going to turn around what they have been providing from last season, I think he is the name that can get himself back to vintage Hideki form with the time off. Maybe more so than these other names. My model wasn't a huge fan of Straka. I know markets seemed to like him a little bit. I was out on him for that reason, but Hideki was the one that at least had that positive trajectory for me inside my model for win equity.
Nick, what do you think?
Yeah, same answer for me. I got him at 46 to 1 on my numbers right now. So obviously that sample size is kind of all over the place based on what Hideki we've seen lately. But in terms of just pedigree overall, give me Hideki in that matchup all day.
Yeah, boom or bust. That's pretty much what you want when you take one of these longer shot wagers that are outside of 50 to 1. So I think if somebody's going to, randomly pop out of nowhere, Hideki makes as much sense as anybody.
Guys, first event of the PGA Tour is coming up this week. Couldn't be more excited about it. I know you gentlemen have content out there other than just this podcast. Nick, I'll start with you. Where can we find your work this week, whether it's on golf, the NFL, everything?
Yeah, finishing up the NFL season. Super excited about week 18. A lot of teams still have a lot to play for, so it should be a really good full slate. for week 18 at windailysports.com, and then Better Golf Pod at Better Golf Pod on Twitter. With my man Spencer here, really excited to get the golf season underway as football season kind of winds down.
Spencer, how about you?
So you can find me on Twitter at TOffSports. I will be providing all my usual content that I do for Action Network. Multiple articles throughout the week. We'll have a Wednesday article that's going to be geared towards outrights moving forward. There's going to be the in-tournament plays that come into the mix from Thursday night to Saturday night. You can find me over at Rotoballer. I provide a lot of content there. If you like any of the numbers that you heard on this show or want to dive a little bit deeper into the statistical backings this year and have a model that can work for you, I do have a model that I released there for anybody that's trying to take their game to the next level here in 2024. So hope you consider checking that out. And as Nick said, we will be starting back up again on Better Golf Podcasts. So very excited to have that back into the mix.
Super excited to check out all of that stuff this week, especially some of those weekend in-tournament ads that you're going to have, Spencer. Looking forward to those. And you can find me on Twitter at RobertoA213. You can once again find all of our golf posts on the Action Network. Go to sports, click on golf. You can find everything there. I'm one of our golf editors, so we are pumping out content. Excited to get the best bets file out there this evening on Tuesday, and we'll have a ton of content, whether it's long shots, first round leader, matchups, placement bets, all coming out on Wednesday as well. So excited to get back in the full swing of things, as we'll have more golf content than we did in the FedEx Cup fall. One reminder, Links and Locks is presented by Bet365. Bet365 doesn't do ordinary. They believe that every sport should be epic. Every touchdown, every game, every point, every play. From the moments that are legendary to the ones that fly under the radar. See for yourself when you sign up today with code ACTION, and you'll get $365 in bonus bets when you bet just $1. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Must be 21 or older only. Must be present in Colorado, Kentucky, Iowa, New Jersey, Ohio, or Virginia. If you or someone you know has a gambling problem and wants help, call 1-800-GAMBLER in Colorado, Kentucky, New Jersey, Ohio, and Virginia, or 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. Terms and conditions apply. Once again, you can find us on Twitter. Nick is at SticksPicks with an X. Spencer is at TOffSports. I'm at RobertoA213. Thanks again to everyone who makes this podcast possible, especially our producers, Noah Niederhofer and Matt Mitchell. Thanks for tuning into the Sentry preview, and aloha.